But I found that through Christ, that's where the true freedom and the true liberty is.
And every one of us came here with something we can do. And my only hope is just to maximize it.
Holy are the peacemakers. I mean, that gives it a whole new perspective.
You know, this is the way to progress on the covenant path.
Hello and welcome to Latter-day Profiles. I'm Brian Howard. We're here on the campus of Brigham Young University, Idaho, and joining me today is Jenifer Greenwood. Jenifer, welcome. So good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Gracious enough to join us, invited to come and speak at a forum today. Jenifer is the Director of Policy and General Officer Support in the Priesthood and Family Department for the church, and a recent, addition to that job title, Executive Secretary to the Priesthood and Family Executive Council. That's a mouthful, but we'll talk about that, and I'm excited to talk to you more about that. But first, let's talk about a little bit about your background. Jenifer, where'd you grow up? Where are you from?
I'm actually from Port Orchard, Washington, which is the middle of nowhere. It's a tiny little town on the Kitsap Peninsula, almost directly west of Seattle, across the Puget Sound.
No, I've got some insights because you were talking to students today, and so I know more than I would have, but apparently you caught the bug for writing somewhere in the 4th grade or something like that. Tell us about that.
I was in 4th grade. I don't actually think of myself as a natural writer, but in 4th grade is when I discovered that there's power in words. And it was a simple day. My teacher, Mrs. Jones, was talking about the difference between formal writing and informal writing, and she read a passage of formal writing that for some reason touched my soul in a very spiritual way. And I didn't know how to articulate that as a child. I had to be well into adulthood to think back on that experience and recognize that as a manifestation of the Spirit, that words were going to be important to me and important to my life. So I do look back on that now as a turning point. At the time, I didn't have the words to talk about how important words are.
You know, isn't that interesting? I think a lot of times, maybe even our youth or even older, we think and don't think about feeling the Spirit on some things. But in retrospect, it's like that was definitely a spiritual moment where that changed your life, and that you remember it now. Obviously, had a big impact. Let's talk about your career path. You ended up going to BYU, but your first choice wasn't English as much as you liked words, right? What were you thinking about as far as career choice when you started to go to BYU?
I felt a lot of pressure to do something practical. So even though I knew I had a certain bent towards words, towards writing, towards editing, I felt like I needed to do something where I could get a job. And that doesn't mean that you can't get a job as an English major, because my life has proven that you can. So in the beginning, I was an undeclared major, and then I thought about doing sociology. And then I found the more classes that I took, that I just needed to do something that filled my soul. And so I was not far into my second semester, I think, when I finally did just break down and declare an English major.
So, you know, life has a bunch of unintended consequences. I imagine you had to do an internship as part of your degree, and so you got an internship with the church. How did that come about?
It honestly was a whim. I was working on a master's degree, just happened to find an advertisement. I didn't have plans for that next semester. It was summer, and I didn't know what I was going to do in the fall. I'd done all my courses, and I just applied on a whim. I don't know why they hired me. Back in those days, BYU only had one editing class, at least that I was aware of. I had taken that class. I had enjoyed it. I had learned some things, but I was so far from being an editor at that point in my career. And they took a chance on me, which I'm grateful for.
So what does an editor do? So a lot of people I hear, an editor writing, but what does an editor do? What did they actually hire you to do?
So I was hired to be an editor in what was then curriculum editing. And so I did a lot of really various things. I worked on a primary manual. I edited posters. So, I checked them for style and grammar and punctuation and all those kinds of things. I helped with just some church communications, but the most interesting thing that I did in my internship was I edited food labels for the church's food production. So I think I did peaches and some kind of soup. That's a while ago. But the projects that came through that shop were wide and varied.
Well, somehow that worked into full-time employment, working for the Liahona for church magazines. How did that come about, and what were your responsibilities as you moved into full-time employment?
Well, that actually was a miracle in my life. So I finished my internship, didn't plan on working for the church. It was Christmas time. I went back up to Washington to spend Christmas with my family, and it's amazing what information people can get from church membership, because my parents' phone rang and it was somebody from the church magazine saying, hey, we have a part-time job and we've heard good things about you. Would you be interested in coming to work for us? That eventually turned into full-time, and I did a little bit of everything at church magazines. I was the copy editor, I was the assistant managing editor, worked on planning, strategy, but I've always kept close to my my love of copy editing. I love a good detailed edit of digging in and making sure that the commas are where they need to be and that all the sources are checked, and there's just a great satisfaction to us, some of us editors, in just making sure that the copy is as clean as it can be.
Every writer loves a good editor. It makes them
well, some don't, writer. But some do.
Well,
it does depend.
If you want to be a good
depend.
writer,
yeah.
That's been my experience. So you're moving along. Tell us about working with the Liahona and how you felt about that. Obviously, you worked there, I think, 16 years, is that right? Until there was a change in things. But what was it about it that was such an attraction to you?
Well, back then, we still had the ensign. And so the Liahona was kind of in the background. It was well known internationally outside of the US and Canada. It was a global magazine in 50 languages back then. But most people in the English speaking world were very aware of the ensign, not so much the Liahona. And my heart is always drawn to the underdog. And working at the Liahona for all those years has just given me this love of the international, the global church. So the saints for whom the Liahona is a lifeline. You know, they're not getting podcasts or social media posts, or they're not coming to General Conference in person. So the Liahona really does create community for them, and it creates community of saints with what's happening here at headquarters, but also what's happening for them locally. So I really did feel for many years that the Liahona was my life's work.
And then it's such a global thing. It's changed so much, even since the 90s until now. The global reach of the church. Got to feel good to be a part of bringing members from all over the world closer to the gospel.
It's amazing. It's an amazing thing to be part of, and especially to see the growth that happened. I think when I started, I think we had about 20 languages, and then when I changed jobs, we had about 50.
Let's talk about the change of jobs. You were loving your job, but then someone came to you and said, hey, we'd like you to switch things up a little bit. Well, how did that happen, and what was the change?
There was a reorganization of several church departments, and so the curriculum department, where I had worked with magazines, was actually combined with the Priesthood and Family Department, and there was a desire to create this new position, which was called Initiative Manager. I had never thought about leaving the magazines, at least seriously. And suddenly I was presented with an option, but maybe not so much an option. I think I explained in another setting today that sometimes in the church means you may do it or you may do it happily. And so I was offered a choice and did it somewhat happily, but not entirely, to take this new position, which was called Initiative Manager. We were a new department, and so it was very undefined. There was lots of figuring out. I had to find my own projects to some extent, and I had never experienced that before. I had always had a ginormous to-do list of things that there was no way I was going to get to, and suddenly I had time to think and to be more strategic and to talk to people and to network. And so it actually is a time that I now look back on quite fondly, although I didn't at the time.
That's a big change, having things that are very, very structured, and then
extremely structured, because you've got magazine deadlines.
Yeah, and then you're the one making the choices on when things happen, and that's got to be a big challenge. So some of the things you do now, in your current position, I thought it was interesting. General Conference comes around on a regular basis. You have a big part in that, in helping out publish the conference talks. What's the process for that, and what's your involvement?
So I manage a team of some of the best editors in the church. I can't speak highly enough of them, who we help get the talks prepared for interpretation, and we source check. We don't do substantive editing. We're not telling the speakers what they can and can't say, but we are helping them publish a transcript of what happens at General Conference. And we're doing it as quickly as we can. So our goal is to have the English text published by Tuesday after General Conference. So that's about 48 hours after General Conference finishes. And then at that same time, we also send that final version of the text out to translators, and they begin their work, and their schedule is even scarier than ours as they try to get the languages published.
How do you feel about doing that? That sounds like both a little bit daunting, but also pretty cool that you're able to delve into those talks.
It's an amazing thing to be part of. Every time when we finish, I think we can never do that again. And then we do. 6 months later, we do it again, and it works, and the process works. And we even learned some things during COVID about how to do it better, how to communicate better with the speakers and get their approval of their talks, and how to use more of a digital process than we ever had before. So just a few blessings of the pandemic.
The blessings and the curse of the pandemic. We did learn a lot of things with that. That's just a part of your job. You do so many other things. One of the things that you've been helping out, it seems like the constant rewrite of the church handbook, because it seems like every week I could get an update, say, hey, there's something that's changed. How does that work, and what's been your involvement with that?
Well, we hope it's only updated 2 or 3 times a year, but it does feel more often than that. I agree. So a couple of years ago, the church took Handbook 1 and Handbook 2, which had really been in print and only limited access to Handbook 1, and we combined those into what's now the general handbook. So there are 38 chapters in the handbook, and my team and I were responsible for the rewrite of about half of those chapters, and helped with many of the others. And part of what we were trying to accomplish with this new handbook is to speak to a global church. We wanted to use more of a ministerial voice. It still is about policy and guidelines and framework, but we wanted it to feel like it was coming from the Savior's church. So we fondly refer to that as the ministerial voice that we tried to create. And then we also wanted to teach the why of some of the principles in the handbook. So instead of just people reading about a dictate, we wanted them to understand the doctrine and the Savior's teaching behind what is included in the handbook. So the rewrite was concluded about a year ago, but things change. We have a living prophet, and things change constantly. So we really have, we do update more often than members can probably respond to, but 2 or 3 times a year there is a handbook update that goes out.
Kind of handy when it's now all digital, so there's no reprinting and sending them back out, right? You can make changes and they come out immediately. That's really awesome. And I'm thinking about, as your day-to-day, you get to rub shoulders with a lot of great people, leaders of the church. I think of going into office and saying hi to my neighbor, hi Fred or whomever, and you get to have share some office space with some really cool people. What's that like? And I think a lot of times we probably have the issue of thinking all the brother stuff kind of walk on water, but they're wonderful people, but they're humans just like the rest of us. What's that experience been like as far as working with those folks and then being able to see them on a day-to-day basis?
Well, most of the general authorities are in the church administration building, and we're of course in the church office building, so we have some interaction there. I work more closely with the general officers. Some of them are housed on our floor. But my impression of working with those called leaders is that it's been very testimony building for me. They're human. We all have bad days. The Lord puts up with us. He puts up with our bad days, but I've seen the work that they do, and I've seen the hand of the Lord in their calls and in those things that they're able to accomplish. And so for me, knowing them, the little bit that I do, has been very, very testimony affirming.
You have had a lot going on, a very busy job, as you've discussed earlier in the day, is talking about some of the things you do. You're kind of on call all the time, right? Because it's something that things need to happen, then you need to be available. How do you handle that, and what's that been like for you to be ready at a moment's notice?
It's mostly just a matter of answering your phone when it rings. And it doesn't matter when it rings. If it's the middle of sacrament meeting, and that doesn't happen very often, obviously. If it's a Saturday, it's just being responsive. When you work with called leaders, their call is not limited to 9 to 5. Of course, there are always general authorities, and there are always general officers and others who I work with on the staff side. So it's really just a matter of being available.
You've had some very busy callings as well. I served as a stake primary president, as a ward young women's president, and for a pretty long time. I think 5 years for one, 3 for the other. That's a good amount of time. How have those experiences been for you, being able to serve in those callings and also balancing it with what you're doing on your day-to-day work schedule, which is probably like plates in the air, I'm supposing. But.
Well, the great thing about those callings and my job is that it all comes together. It's all about building the kingdom of God. And so it's easy to not put things into really specific buckets, but to try and think about using my time in the best way to do God's work. I have had some busy callings. Most of the time when I was young women president and also when I was stake primary president, I was also an ordinance worker in the temple. So my life has been at certain points extremely church focused, which I think has been a blessing for me. I don't know that I could do that now. I don't know that I could do that many things, but when I was younger and could, it really was a blessing. One of the unique things about my call as stake primary president is that I don't have children, and I had never had a calling in primary. And it's really intimidating to stand in front of a bunch of women and try and instruct or train or even act like you know what you're talking about when you know that they all know so much more than you do. And yet it was a very spiritual experience to be called a stake primary president, to serve in that calling, to be humble, to learn. I had great counselors. They taught me about primary. When I was first called, my ward primary president let me just come and sit in the back of primary so I could remember what primary is about, not having been there since when I turned 12 myself. But an amazing opportunity. And I do think some of my professional background, I had written and edited a lot of things for children over the years. I think that did play into a certain amount of preparation that maybe got me through what was in the beginning an overwhelming task and experience.
Yeah, those are big challenges. Today you spoke at the forum and you talked about living the dream versus living the plan. I thought it was very interesting. Explain that a little bit and what your message was to the students as they're trying to forge the way, figure out where they want to be and what they want to do.
Well, living the dream for me has come to represent this somewhat fictional idea that all of us have, that there is a dream out there and we're gonna get there. And by that I don't mean don't have dreams. I think it's important to have dreams, but it's more important to live God's plan. And by that I mean his eternal plan for all of us as his children. I tried to set up a contrast between sometimes what we think of as these Instagram-worthy photos where everything is clean and beautiful and neat and matching, and then the real life that we all live in, which is messy. And we have to stand in that chaos sometimes and still recognize God's hand in the midst of the chaos. And I just, some of the leaders here at BYU Idaho asked me to tell a little bit of my own story, which for me has been a kind of a long period of learning that I may not get all the things that I dreamed of, but God has such a better plan for me than I could have ever come up with for myself. I would have never thought of working for the church, and I would never have thought of being in leadership in the Priesthood and Family Department when obviously I neither hold the priesthood nor do I have a traditional family, and yet somehow he could envision that for me when I certainly could not. So I hope that what students took away from that was just a recognition that have dreams, but sometimes dreams are stepping stones to something better.
So I did appreciate that. Actually, that's one of the notes I wrote down as you were speaking, was the stepping stones, that dreams can turn into stepping stones. Give us a little more insights about that, because I think, if I understand it right, it's okay to have dreams, but those dreams might not always land where we want to be, but they take us the direction, even if it's a different direction than what we want.
Yeah, I do think our Heavenly Father wants us to have dreams, and he wants us to have aspirations, but he doesn't want us to be tied to, at least in my estimation, really specifically to those dreams, because he has a broader view, and he can take us places that we wouldn't dream of. When I was first offered my current job, I described it to somebody as a job so dreamy, I never dreamed of it, and I couldn't have dreamed of it. But obviously God had a plan and had led me in that path for a long time. But my limited capacity, I wouldn't and didn't dream of doing some of the things that I've been able to do. So I've just learned to trust in his plan because it's so much better than what my dreams are.
I want to ask you about the Executive Secretary to the Priesthood and Family Executive Council. It's a pretty unique position. Tell about that. And as I understand, right, it's the first woman to hold that position. Is that correct?
I think so, yes. And it's really a lot of just supporting the brethren. There are 3 executive councils in the church. It's helping them set up their meetings and their agendas, and then actually keeping the minutes of the meetings, which become part of the official record of the church.
Mm-hmm. I know, as you're looking back, it's always 2020 as you look back, and you see those key points. You see some of those stepping stones that you were talking about, the different positions that you saw that get you in the direction that you are now, and how I'm supposing you're probably very appreciative, even though they went in a different direction than you had anticipated.
Absolutely. I look back on all of the things that I've done in my career, and they really have been very different, very disparate, but they have added up to some preparation that I think has helped me be prepared to be a director in the Priesthood and Family Department. My magazine experience, some of the callings that I've had, just opportunities that I've had to meet people. It was all leading in a direction, even when I didn't necessarily see that it was.
Tell us about, you said as working in this position has really helped you build your testimony of the kingdom and of Jesus Christ. Tell us about that and how that has helped you to increase your testimony.
Some of it is honestly through opposition. We go through hard things, and there have been times when I thought, maybe I don't want to work for the church. I said I haven't seriously considered leaving, and I haven't. But so it's been a process of recognizing the importance of the work that we do, and that we all do, not just church employees, but we all do as disciples of Jesus Christ, recognizing how much I want to be a part of that, and developing an ability to kind of work through that opposition, and which really just comes from all those Sunday school answers, getting on your knees, praying for a witness that this is the way to go, this is the right thing to do, this is God's plan for your life. And I can't point to a specific experience, but when I look back across many years of church employment, I just can recognize how my testimony has grown, and it's grown through hard things as well as great things. I mean, I've been able to sometimes see amazing things happen in the planning stage and then the implementation stage, and that's testimony affirming. And then there's just those hard days, but you get through and you recognize that. I love that quote that President Monson used to say about courage is that little voice that just tells you can try again tomorrow. And so that overcoming of opposition has built my testimony, just one little drop at a time.
There's always the good and the bad, but you obviously love your job and what you do. What is it about it that you love the most, that you appreciate the most, and what you get to do?
That's a great question. I would have to say what I love the most about my job is, as we've worked on some of the projects that we've done, and we can use the Handbook as an example, I have loved to see revelation distill. And it's not an easy process, and it's often a somewhat chaotic process. Revelation is scattered among a lot of people, and it's even scattered chronologically as well as geographically sometimes. But I love watching a lot of sometimes diametrically opposed or just differing opinions coalesce into a unity that does seem to indicate the Lord's will for moving forward. And so it has strengthened my testimony just of the revelatory process, also the council process, but I loved being able to see that.
Jenifer, it's been a pleasure having you here. Director of Policy and General Officer Support in the Priesthood and Family Department, as well as the Executive Secretary to the Priesthood and Family Executive Council. Jenifer Greenwood, thank you so much for taking some time and sharing some insights into both your personal life and what you do professionally. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Jenifer.
so much.